Hi, everyone. Welcome to Allcore Devs number 128. Uh, we have a few things on the agenda today. First, Aero Glacier went live yesterday. Then we can discuss Kinsugi and the merge. Then finally, EIP 4488, which we've discussed a lot in the past 2 weeks. I guess starting with Aero Glacier, it seemed everything generally went well with the fork. One thing I noticed is there were two Chinese miners, I think OKX and Hyobi, that did not upgrade. I was not able to check this morning to see if they had. I saw like 2 blocks mined on the old chain. I don't know if anyone has any more context on that or just anything else they wanted to share about Aero Glacier. Okay. Yeah, I'll try and dig into this later today to see if the 2 miners have upgraded. It's been a bit harder to get a hold of them since the mining ban in China. Next up, Kinsugi. So we launched another devnet this week. Does anyone have any kind of updates they want to share about their progress on the merge generally?
I can give you an update.
Yeah.
So on Tuesday, we started Merge DevNet 3 that is based on latest v3 Kinsugi spec. Generally speaking, it's been successful. Nonetheless, at the beginning, there was a little chaos, mainly because of renaming. However, all clients' teams quickly delivered fixes. Now we have stable network with Geth, Nethermind, Lodestar, Lighthouse, Teku. Nibus has some issues that we should investigate together. I mean, Geth, Nethermind, and Nibus teams. As far as I know, Prism has a known bug and they are working on it. Marius performed spamming, but he hasn't destroyed the network yet. In Nethermind, we continue working on things. What is important, we updated instructions on how to run Nethermind with every consensus client, so everyone can try to sync with the devnet, and that is all, I think.
Cool. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can speak to Besu. We're a little behind on getting onto the devnets, but we have the v3 spec implemented, and we're interoperating locally with Mergemock and Teku, and we're just waiting on one more PR before we're going to be joining the devnet. Basically, we need to get our backwards sync PR merged in, and as soon as we do, we have the instructions and get that out there so that other people can be working with that execution client also.
Cool. Anyone else? Okay, and I guess more generally, I was talking with Mikhail yesterday. Oh, Mikhail, you're here, yeah. It seems like the kind of big buckets of things that we still need to figure out are optimistic sync. So there's some work on speccing that and kind of addressing some of the edge cases. One thing that we also discussed earlier on was basically the auth mechanism between the consensus and execution layer nodes. That's still kind of something we're going to need to figure out. And then Marius, you had found some issues with like the fork choice if there's competing proof of work blocks at the merge. That's still something that needs to be addressed in the specs and in tests. So they seem like the 3 kind of big outstanding things. Obviously, testing all around. The more we can do, the better. That said, it seemed this week when I was talking to people that we should be able to launch Kinsugi as kind of a more long-lived devnet next week. Perry and his team were working towards that, and it seemed like we have kind of all the infrastructure set up to not only launch the devnet, but have kind of a UI that people who want to interact with it can use. So I guess we'll be doing that in the next week or so. One thing that would be really helpful from client teams is having like some instructions about how to connect your client to the devnet, even though it's not merged in a master branch, and it's maybe a bit it maybe requires a bit of like manual wrangling. I think that's really something that would be good over the holidays, so that people can kind of try out different clients and see them working on Kinsugi.
Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
so I have two small things. One thing was when we launched Kinsugi, when we launched devnet 3. There was some issue with clients not proposing any blocks, or not just proposing empty blocks after the merge. And so I was wondering what's the correct behavior there. Like if you're like, I think that there's a case to be made for validators just proposing empty blocks. But there can also be a case can be made for just not proposing a block, because like your validator is something's broken and you need to fix it. And if you if you validate and if you attest to a block, even if you know that this block should contain a payload but it doesn't, then it's better for the network, because the network keeps on moving. But not really, not if everyone does it. So yeah, I think like I'm not sure what's the best behavior to do then if like empty blocks are proposed post merge.
And
So that's probably,
yeah, what's the reason that empty blocks are proposed post merge? Is it just when there's competing proof of work blocks, or is that all the time?
no, it was because the execution layers were not or the consensus layers were not connecting to the execution layers correctly.
Right.
So they figured out that the merge was done, but they didn't produce they didn't call execute payload or prepare payload correctly, and so they didn't get any payloads, so they just proposed empty blocks. As far as I know, I don't know what really happened, but this is like what I think happened.
Yeah, you mean empty? Empty means that no transactions has been in those blocks.
Empty, I think empty meant that no payload was in this block.
You mean there was like zero payload, like before the merge?
Yes.
Oh, then it means that actually, if it happens, it can be considered as the merge has been done, because the consensus layer client starts to switch the logic into the transition process once it sees non-empty payload. So this kind of payloads, if the transition is already in progress in the network, then if this kind of block is published with the payload with all zeros, the owner's behavior is to reject this kind of blocks, because this is not valid blocks anymore. So we can try to figure this out like offline, not spend the time.
Yes. That's just all I wanted to say. And cool. The other thing is, yesterday night I had the great idea to just go ahead and shadow fork Goerli, and I think we can do that pretty easily. And we plan to do, like, once the devnet is merged, once the Kinsugi testnet is running, then we're going to start trying to create our own shadow fork of Goerli. And so if that is something that you're interested in joining, then reach out to me and Perry. We're probably going to set this up. That's it.
Awesome.
When do you want to do this?
After the testnet is done. So I think it's probably a thing of like a day or so to figure it out, and it will not impact the normal operation of Goerli. We will just sync Goerli nodes and then say that the total terminal difficulty is reached, which means our nodes will fork off of Goerli, and then we'll continue on the merged chain.
And you're going to share the mempool with the Goerli nodes after the merge. After this, yes, let's say merge.
Not really, because we will have different fork IDs.
I see.
But yeah, at least for some point we will still have some of the same transactions. But then the networks will diverge probably.
Okay.
That's really cool. Yeah, looking forward to seeing it.
Just continuing a bit on Kinsugi planning, is everyone, like, can we have some consensus about who's going to take part from the execution client side for next week's testnet? And is it okay, like, is everyone on track for Tuesday, or should we be looking at delaying it to Thursday or something like that?
We are okay with Tuesday.
Okay, sounds good. I just tossed a message about features and things like that in the interrupt channel on ETH R&D. So just have a look whenever you guys are free, and then we can take a discussion there.
Yeah, and I saw your message on the R&D channel also paints the consensus layer team, so that's definitely something we want to make sure. And yeah, it seems reasonable if delaying a couple days makes an extra team kind of able to join the network, we probably should.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. But yeah, we can discuss that on Discord. I don't think we have to, unless someone has some specific point, I don't think we have to continue here.
Anything else about the merge in general?
Yeah, I have a small announcement. I've opened up the proposal. It's been mentioned during the previous call. It's the get payload bodies. It's now a PR to the engine API spec. So the get payload bodies function reflects the logic of the get block bodies message of the ETH protocol. This is actually the crux of this proposal, because it's apparently it's easy to be implemented. It's just basically it's just exposing almost the same, or literally the same logic in the other part of the client, in the other API. So please take a look. Any concerns, any issues that you feel with this proposal, go to this PR, comment, and let's discuss. I'll keep it open for a while, and then just merge if no opposition.
Sorry, what was this discussion? This thing you're talking about? Where is there a link there somewhere?
Oh yeah, I've just dropped it in the chat.
Oh,
you see it?
Cool.
Yeah. So one of the concerns, there is an issue. There is a discussion thread in the issue. One of the concerns was like, if we expose in this method, which requests the payload bodies by hash, it actually doesn't allow for using the linearity property of a blockchain, like it would be if we were requesting those bodies by numbers, which doesn't allow for, like if the linearity property is utilized, it allows for more optimal requests for the same data to be done on disk in terms of disk queries. So that was one of the concerns. But as long as this reflects the ETH protocol message, I think it's okay. Probably not. So worth taking a look at.
And to be clear, this is not something we expect to have by Tuesday, right? Like we would have this, I guess, in the post Kinsugi version.
Yeah, right. So it's not. It's like for for after Kinsugi merge stack.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, just quick feedback. Like if you're worried about the like optimality of this thing, so at least for Geth, we have the whole transaction thing stored as RLP and also as snappy encoded RLP. Probably doesn't make sense to like return snap encoded, but we could do return RLP list. But the way you proposed it, we would have to, I guess, marshal it and then serialize it in some other form. Maybe it doesn't matter. Yeah, quick thought. Never mind.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, the form which these transactions are in the response is actually the same form as they are in the execution payload structure. So the consensus layer can understand it. It doesn't understand the RLP.
Yep.
Anything else on the merge? Okay. So I guess next up, we had discussed on the last call EIP 4488 for people who like don't have a ton of background. The EIP proposed to decrease the call data costs, so the extra data that's sent along with transactions, from 16 gas per byte to 3 gas per byte, and to add a cap to the maximum amount of call data in a block, as well as a stipend for transactions with only a small amount of call data. And the goal there was it would make rollup transactions cheaper because they use a lot of call data to settle on mainnet. There was some concern raised about the fact that rollups aren't super cheap today already, and they might get more expensive. And this EIP, is a fairly simple change, and we could potentially do it even before the merge if we wanted to. And this way we would kind of future-proof ourselves with regards to costs on rollups. I talked to a bunch of people this week about this, and it seems like there were a lot of varying opinions about how we should approach it. Not 100% sure where to start, but I guess the Get team shared kind of their position in writing this morning. So that's maybe a good place to start from about this. Oh, I see Ansgar, you raised your hand. Do you want to go first?
No, just wondering, because I would say the Geth position is already kind of diving into the question of should we go ahead with the fork for this or not, and maybe it could make sense before that to just briefly talk about the kind of the analysis on different levels of stipend and different minor profitability, because that's more like a neutral topic before we get into the details of.
Yeah, okay, I like that. Yeah, so Ansgar, you've been spending a bunch of time in the past 2 weeks looking at that. You want to give some context and share your analysis? I think you had a link also, if you want to share this in the chat.
Sure, yeah, I can.
Or if you even want to share your screen as you're going through it, whatever works best for you.
Sure, I can do that. Give me like 1 second.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So again, this is completely separate from the question of whether this EIP should go ahead or not. But just in general, the question was there were some concerns raised around, for one, that now that we have two separate constraints on blocks, basically that there's a cap on call data, and then there's still the gas limit cap, that mining could become more complicated. And so if you run a simple mining algorithm, like you would probably find in Geth or other execution clients, whether basically you might be outcompeted by miners who might run closed source sophisticated algorithms. And then as part of that analysis, it turns out that this is also interesting for questions around specifically like basically what level of stipend allows what level of transactions to still be included or not. And so basically all I did here was just sample blocks from mainnet over the like one week prior to when I did the analysis, and just kind of like basically simulated what if at the very beginning of a block you would basically always already use up all the call data cap, because currently, of course, which is what's important to say, that count blocks always have only use a little bit of call data, and so if we just simulated those blocks, the call data cap would just never be reached. And so in order to simulate what happens if the call data cap is reached, I kind of just added high call data filler transactions in the beginning, so that this 1 megabyte limit of the EIP is already used, and you can only use this stipend to add all the other transactions. And then I went through the transactions and simulated different mining algorithms, either and specifically 3 different ones that I outlined here. So there's a naive strategy where you just literally do the same thing that Geth does today. You go through the list of transactions sorted by how much they would pay to you as a miner. And whenever you reach a transaction that's not includable because of the call data limit, you just skip it. So that's basically that was also part of the Geth prototype implementation we did. That's basically a one-liner change. Then it turned out as part of this approach that there's a slight modification to this that actually makes a lot of difference, and that's what we call the backlog strategy, where basically instead of completely throwing away that transaction, if it doesn't fit, you just set it aside. And then if later on, because of the stipends, because they kind of accumulate, if they are not fully used up, if at any point you have a little bit more room in the block again, you just go look at your backlog and you keep that partially sorted so it's efficient, and see if any of those that you had to skip initially now become available again. And that way, basically, you don't have the inefficiencies of just throwing away transactions that might be includable later on during the block. And then the benchmark to compare that against is, of course, just the optimal strategy. So for that, I just end up using a knapsack solver to actually find the best thing a theoretically optimal miner could do. And then looking at the results, so basically, this is as a function of the stipend size, which makes sense, right? Because if you basically don't have any stipend, then you just can't include any transactions at all once your call data limit is reached. And as the stipend goes up, of course, at some point, it just doesn't matter anymore. And as you might expect, the optimal strategy kind of like starts with only being able to include basically that those are just pure ETH transfers initially, 40% or something of blocks, and then it goes up to close to 100% as you raise the stipend size. Importantly, though, while the naive algorithm is indeed, especially for small call stipend sizes, is a bit like less efficient in being able to include all the transactions, the backlog mechanism, which is still very simple to implement, almost like follows this optimal curve perfectly. Of course, at the beginning, it's still a little bit below, but like then even if you go to relatively small stipend sizes around 200 to 300 bytes, it's within 1% of each other. So basically, a miner who would run the backlog strategy would not have like at all noticeably smaller profitability from like a closed source miner. And then as I was saying, basically as part of the analysis, it also like happened to come up the question of how would this EIP affect the ability for normal transactions to still be included in blocks, and especially that's just maybe already relevant then for when the Geth team is going to talk about their concerns in a second, because one of these concerns that I read there was that basically transactions above the stipend, and again the ERP right now says stipend 300, but we might end up with something like 260 actually look better, even better, because it's just sufficient maybe. So that any transaction above this 260 bytes in call data would basically have to compete with very high budget roll-up transactions. But then the interesting kind of result of this is that actually, because you have this accumulating nature of the stipend, right? If there are 10 transactions and they all only use 100 100 bytes of call data, you always get this extra 1C, and that accumulates, and so then you can have a bit bigger transaction afterwards. And so because of the nature of the accumulating stipend, actually, even at say something like 260, the backlog strategy lets you include over 99% of all transactions within the next block that they kind of usually would end up in anyway. And that already includes current day rollup transactions, so like really big call data transactions. And of course, those would be the ones in the front of the block, not the ones that have to compete in the back of the block. So basically, if you exclude those, it means that all normal size transactions would still be excludable as normal without any issues. And I did look into just now into this a bit more, and basically found that at 260 specifically, the median size of like the excluded transactions here was something like 2,400 bytes. So that gives you a feeling for like that really only these very big transactions would basically have to now compete for these potentially more expensive parts of the block, and everything else can just be included as normal. So I would say these kind of concerns are probably like and end up not being an issue with this ERP. But yeah, there are enough other valid concerns to continue talking about. But I think that's all I have to say on this.
Any comments?
Not sure if there are any specific questions or comments.
Peter, yeah.
I do have a question. So with this whole backlog mechanism, the idea is relatively simple, but so what's an interesting problem that can happen? Let's say that I fill up the block space with rollups, and then I have a high paying but high high space usage transaction. Let's say I have a transaction which pays a lot of money, but it requires, say, 10 kilobyte worth of data. And I have smaller transactions that are cheap, but they require, let's say, only 500 bytes. Now, if I go with this backlog approach, and what will happen is I will keep adding tiny transactions up until the point where I free up 500 byte space. And at that point, I'm going to see that, oh, I have 500 bytes. I can shove in one of the more expensive transactions, but I will never actually consider the super expensive transaction, because the super expensive one is 10 kilobytes, and I'm never going to have that big of a gap, because there will be always something smaller that will just gobble up that space. So what I'm kind of afraid of is that deploying a contract will become this crazy expensive thing, because it's going to be a large call data, so you cannot use this backlog hack to just stash it in somehow, because you will always have somebody else beating you to the punchline. And the rollups will theoretically, if rollups become popular, then rollups will consume the block space, and they will have significantly more funds. So essentially, if you want to, for whatever reason, to deploy a very high very high space using transaction on Ethereum layer 1, then you're going to get a lot screwed. So
well, doesn't that just mean that the contract deploying transaction has to compete fairly with the rollups for block space?
Yes.
I guess I'm wondering why this is a problem. they might have to pay a little bit of a tip to get included with the rollup transactions.
I'm not, so I also mentioned this on the little document that you wrote up. I don't necessarily consider this a problem. This is just a rebalancing that people need to be aware of. So people need to be aware of that if we implement 4488, potentially deploying contracts on level 1 will cost an arm and a leg, even though even now it costs an arm. So it's going to potentially, it can make it significantly more expensive.
Yeah, we should have been a bit clearer about this. Basically, it's not also there was this point was also raised by Dankrad. It's maybe not written in the best way right now in our position. So basically, it's not so much that there's no like it's not generally unfair that like big transactions have to compete with other big transactions. It's more that because there is this limit, then like it kind of like it shifts really like sort of like what can you do kind of really depends on if your problem fits into the limit or not. And we think that's just kind of something that it may not be intended, or I don't know. We just wanted to highlight it because it wasn't really highlighted in the EAP. It was like one sentence, or I don't know.
So I guess in practice, what it means is that transactions with large call data might have to pay a bit of a tip, right? That's the practical.
So they will become more expensive, is what Peter is saying. And yes, and yeah. They can.
Well, I mean, but they also do profit from lowering of the call data price, right? So will they become more expensive than now? Is not completely obvious.
For us, I think we are not really trying to stress this point too much. For us, it's like the main thing is we are just really, I can just summarize it really quick. So we are just afraid of the two-dimensional nature of this scheme, and this is the sole reason why we are complaining about it so much. We feel that like there can be like unforeseen consequences from that. And we are trying to basically stress this point because we feel like, it's already like, something where it took us a bit of time to figure out, like what are the consequences of the scheme. Just by basically staring at the formula and discussing, we kind of figured that, oh shit, it's actually going to mean that contract deployment is going to, it may cost a lot more, or, it's in a different, it just means you have to think about it like a lot more. We're just worried that this, like this change is not really like, super, it's not super clear what's going to happen. Like, I mean, obviously you guys are researching it right now. So, I guess eventually it will be very clear what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, I think. As a practical comment, though, we need to be also aware that the consequences of having rollups in practice means that it will always become more expensive to use the layer 1 itself because the rollups are just more competitive, right? So rollups just make much more efficient use of it. So in the ultimate end game, layer 1 transactions will become more expensive due to that. But I think that's okay. You should use rollups essentially.
Okay. But then one counter argument is that if rollups are so much more efficient, then why subsidize them even further?
Given that this is already drifting into the more of the kind of the substantive discussion around whether like it makes sense or not, I want to just very briefly say on this as well that on like the specific aspect of this two-dimensionality of the kind of the block space constraints now. I would probably frame it a little bit kind of like the other way around, where currently there is no protection of, say, quote unquote normal transactions against rollup transactions. So as we're talking about, like the very long-term scaling plan for Ethereum is for everything to move to rollups, and so like in the long run, the ETH1 execution will be more and more just rollup management. Of course, the question is how long that'll take, but and basically at some point, if blocks start to just be full of rollup transactions, and that can already happen without this EIP, normal transactions would be more and more outcompeted. Of course, the kind of the saving grace is that right now it's so expensive that maybe rollup adoption is a little bit slow, and we have more time. Whereas if we introduce this EIP, it becomes cheaper, and so rollup adoption might speed up a little bit. But importantly, and I think this is what I kind of wanted to say, is importantly with this EIP, I understand it as a protection mechanism for normal transactions, because now with the call data limit and the stipend mechanism, basically once we reach the level of adoption for rollups where they fill a significant portion of each block, they're basically limited to the first, or like to some part of the block with this EIP because of this call data limit. And so the rest of the block would be left untouched for normal transactions. Whereas without the EIP, if we don't introduce the EIP, once we reach those adoption levels, basically normal transactions have become completely unviable because all normal transactions have to compete with rollup transactions. So it's basically, once we reach adoption without the EIP, I think we will be in a much worse state for normal transactions. The question is just, might the EIP speed up adoption so much that on net it's still a bad effect. But I think the EIP itself is very much of like a help for normal transactions.
Oh. Yeah, thanks.
Vitalik, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think one point I wanted to make on the economics and just on the issue of like, well, if rollups are supposed to be cheap, why subsidize them? One of the considerations here is that there's a difference between like the burst cost of data and the persistent cost of data, right? And right now, the call data gas costs are primarily set based on the burst cost of data. So based on the question of like, if we had 10 times more call data, then worst case blocks would like completely break the network from a peer-to-peer perspective. And the long run roadmap is that there's going to be this dedicated data availability space, and like there's going to be shards to hold this data. And so data markets and like layer one execution markets are going to be more separate. And that would actually basically allow the cost of call, it would mean that the actual cost of call data imposes on the network is much more based on what the persistent cost is, because like there would be a target for layer one execution, and then there would be a separate target for call data consumption. And so you wouldn't have this much this much volatility. So I guess like one way to another way of looking at this is basically to say, look, well, if right now from a burst perspective, call data is priced correctly, but from a persistent perspective, call data is overpriced, then adding some kind of two-dimensional limit basically is the way to make it more correctly priced from a persistent perspective without like mispricing it even more from a burst perspective. But then of course, like we have to ask the question of like, well, like if we only care about the persistent issues, then like what would the correct gas cost of call data look like? And what would it look like in the context of the EIP 4444 when it's going to happen and all of these things? But like basically, like one way to just analyze the economics of this was to just start by asking the question of, if we only cared about burst issues, what would the limit be? If we only cared about persistent issues, what would the limit be? And if those two are misaligned enough that the misalignment just means that there's a lot of applications that could run without verdict things not being run, then it makes sense to try to separate the two somehow.
I guess one thing that we should also consider. So if we just take a look at the costs and saying that, well, with sharding, the cost will be a lot better aligned, and so on. So one thing that is kind of bothersome about the CIP, we also highlighted it, is that it kind of says that, well, 4444 will fix the state growth problem, and kind of that's eventually, and so the EIP kind of says that 4444 should be implemented either at the same time or soon after. And this seems like a super hand-wavy approach to drop 2 terabytes of data on the network every year, because it's not obvious how 4444 will be implemented. It's not obvious when. If we, let's say, we deploy 4488 next year, early next year, then now we again have to make a decision. Do every client all of a sudden focus on 4444 to avoid the chain growth issues, or do we focus on the merge? So again, we just opened up some next set of problems that we need to solve. And I don't know, at one point, is this whole complexity worth it to delay the merge so much? Wouldn't it be more meaningful to push through the merge and then we could focus on these ones? And especially, I guess, if the merge is done, then the ETH2 clients can actually focus on sharding, and the whole two things could somehow progress concurrently. Because I guess the ideal solution is for all of the rollup data to be on the shards. So shouldn't we rather focus on getting the shards up and running as soon as possible?
Yeah, we didn't really want to mention this in the document, but that is kind of like one of the things that, like, if we, are allowed to make like very far ahead sort of planning suggestions, and we kind of feel like, ultimately the place for rollups is, shards.
Yeah, one thing also that we didn't add in this document is that the change proposed is from 16 to 3, which is a pretty drastic change. Normally, I think historically, when we change some protocol constants, we maybe changed it in 2x or 1.5x or something, but this is it's a very large change in one go. Yeah.
And just briefly on the question of motivation, because I think you're saying that that you think long-term shards should be the correct way to increase data throughput, and I think that we all agree on. The question is really just, do we want to incentivize the continued development of technologies that make use of this increased data throughput by already giving them a little bit of that benefit in the short run? Or do we basically want to just tell them, please continue developing this, even though right now it's economically a little bit iffy, because in the long run it will become cheap? And I think that's actually, I think that's a good question. I don't think either one of those options is necessarily the better one, but I do think that it does make quite a bit of difference. Say, optimistically, sharding could arrive in, I don't know, 2 years, but that already feels optimistic. So maybe 2 years, something like that. Whereas this could really theoretically be on mainnet in a couple of months, and so it would make a difference for 1-2 years, which I think would be enough of a justification if we think it's worth it.
But that's not really true, is it? So when you say that this could be on mainnet in 2 or 3 months, yeah, this could be on mainnet, but it also requires 4444, which will most definitely not be on mainnet. So, I mean, so this 4488 just makes things cheaper, and then it's kind of up to client developers to survive until 4444 eventually hits the pipeline.
Yeah, I
So
guess we should make a more structured approach here to talk about it, because some people already said in the comments, can't we just go through the document? We have touched on basically all the points now, I think, except for layer 2 readiness, which is maybe a topic on its own. The thing about the 4444 is that we think it's not going to be so easy to implement. And we have been talking it through multiple times, also over the last couple of years, like how to really achieve this, like, historical data pruning. And I feel like the earliest good opportunity for this would be after the merge, because the merge specifically also binds us to the read subjectivity already. So it's like when, in order to participate in the Ethereum network after the merge, one must accept the weak subjectivity initialization. So I feel like, once we're past that point, we can think about how that initialization is going to look like for the execution layer, because at the moment it doesn't require this kind of initialization, except implicitly with the Genesis block, which I guess everyone has accepted by now. So it's like we need to make a solution for initializing the client with a snapshot, for example. And there are so many questions to solve, like where are they going to get the snapshot from, and how they're going to put it to the client. These things are like, it's easier when there's already like the need to do it for the consensus layer, I think.
So, quick question: is anyone really pushing for this to be included before the merge still? Because I don't think the proposal itself is bad. It has a lot of question marks, in my opinion. A lot of things that we have to that we have to verify, to think about. Doing these large changes without too much data is not an option for me. Especially like taking a look at can the network even handle it, stuff like this. And so like we're not really, or at least I'm not really arguing not to include this change in the future. I'm just arguing that we don't have enough data to meaningfully make a decision about it. And we have enough stuff on the timeline already to work on that is not for 488. So I don't know, like I haven't heard anyone really pushing for this before the merge yet.
So I would still be in favor of doing it before the merge. I think, like, I mean, I agree with all the technical points here, but I still think that the economic and the UX, like, I guess, like the future planning, pushing people towards rollups, showing that they are the future, like that side that we're basically not really discussing here is, I think, still very, very strong.
But
so I would still be.
That is not a political reason, right? That is like a political reason. Then it's basically like it's when you say, like showing.
Yes, absolutely. This is political, but like, I mean, how to, like, the community, as far as I see it, is in favor of doing it. So I think it's fair to say that to address this political reason, right? And not only the technical parts.
So we have tried, not to include changes based on the political reason.
I think we should open up a broader discussion at some point, because I do think that this distinction between tech and political is overrated, but it's something that's probably worth having a longer chat over at some point.
Yeah, and I don't know, I spend a lot of my time trying to gauge this stuff. I think there's probably like some folks who feel strongly about the merge and some who feel strongly about like the reduction. I don't think you can make like a clear case either way that like people really want 4488 before the merge or people really want the merge before. Obviously, you know, if you ask roll-up operators, they'll probably tell you they'd like to have 4488 before. And if you ask other parts of the community who are more concerned about, say, the environmental impact or, you know, the issuance of proof of work, they'll tell you that the merge is more important before. Yeah, so I think it's a hard call to make. Like there's definitely there's definitely folks on both sides, and not like a clear cut.
I mean, I'm clearly against it if it would delay the merge by a month, but I just don't see a reason why it would.
Well, so two notions. One of them is that I don't think it's fair to debate whether we should do the merge first or whether we should do 4488 first, because actually we had a fixed timeline. So I think if we want to include 4488 before that, then 4488 needs to have a very strong case as to why it's good, why it's important enough to replace the existing timeline. So I think it's not, if none of them would have been scheduled until now, then you can debate whether which one is more important or more urgent. But once the timeline is set, and essentially every team, both Ethereum 1 and Ethereum 2 teams are working on towards the merge, it's a bit weird to somehow try to hammer or push in something in between. And but again, what I still want to emphasize is that 4488 is only addressing the monetary problem. It does not address any technical problems related to chain growth. And so, I mean, honestly, I would say that 4488 and 4444 should be implemented together. It feels like a very disingenuous thing to ship 4488 and then problem solved, and then it's the client that's problems on actually making 4488 viable afterwards. So if the 4488 EIP itself says that 4444 is kind of needed for it, then to me it seems that two EIPs should go hand in hand, not that we ship one of them now and then the other one maybe next year, probably not, depending on how the merge goes.
I'm not sure who had their hand up next, but Martin, Mikael, and Scar, the three of you.
Okay, I'll go quickly. Yeah, Duncan said if it delays the merge by 1 month, and I think it definitely would. I mean, we did the postponement of the difficulty bomb, and we've done that so many times now that we can basically do it in our sleep and forget about the fork that's coming up because we know it's going to kind of work. But this kind of change, I agree, it's not like very complex, but such a change in rolling out that fork would take non-insignificant amount of engineering to cut the releases and test it out on the test nets. After having done so and the fork is rolled out, maybe there would also have to be additional resources going into checking this increased network IO and handling any fallout from that and seeing, do the boot nodes croak and what can we do about that, because now there's problems that might need to be solved in all the clients. So I do think that if we were to say, yeah, sure, we want to push through 4488 in a fork before the merge, I definitely think it would delay the merge. Definitely, that's my take. That's it.
Thanks for sharing. I think, and Miguel, you had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just, yeah, quick note. Probably I'm missing something, but as for me, like one of the purposes of 4488 is like the end goal is to reduce the transaction fees. Is this correct? I mean, by leveraging rollups infrastructure.
I don't think that's quite correct. I think the goal of 4488 is to correct a mispricing for certain opcodes or certain things. Call data in particular is arguably mispriced because it needs to be priced on several axes, and we basically chose the simplest mechanism to price on those axes originally, and we should fix that at some point.
Okay, I see. Because if this like the end goal, and if this is what we will get in the end, yeah, that's make like this kind of change is very important from my opinion. But yeah, thanks.
But you guys are saying that we're correcting a misprice, but essentially, currently you are paying 16 gas for storing data indefinitely in the network, and you want to replace that with 3 gas for storing data indefinitely in the network. That's all the EIP does. You are making it 5 times cheaper to store the same data until eternity.
Yes, with the minor caveat that chain history can go theoretically on a hard drive, not an SSD.
Yeah, but
again, it's purely theoretical, and I understand not all clients actually implement it that way. I do think from a gas pricing perspective, state should be priced differently from historic data just due to access requirements.
yes, okay. You could argue that all that chain history can go on a hard drive, but let's say in next year, December, the chain history won't be 300 gigabytes, rather it was going to be 3 terabytes. So when anybody wants to synchronize even Ethereum client, be that fasting, snapsync, fullsync, whatever, they will have to wait 2 weeks on the download just to download 3 terabytes worth. That's, I mean, that's going to kill Ethereum.
Yeah, I'm with you on. Yeah, I'm with you on the 4444 needs to come first.
Edgar? Oh, sorry, Felix, go ahead.
Maybe I should just try and say I think it would be good now kind of to come to sort of a like conclusion here regarding this, because obviously we are not going to settle this today. So we have our position is that we think it's not suitable for inclusion before the merge. We are not saying it's not suitable for inclusion ever. It is absolutely possible to do more research and figure out the hard questions, and then like implement something like 4444 to there is always the possibility of including this particular E, but we feel like the necessary work is not possible to complete before the merge. So that is our position. Other people feel differently. They feel strongly that it should be included because it's a good signal to the community that we are committed to a future where rollups are much more important. And these things, we cannot reconcile these points at all. And so I just wanted to say that basically, I think we need to have more in-depth technical discussions about the individual aspects of this, for sure. But I'm not sure if like this call is the best venue for that.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think this call has been valuable to like highlight the different concerns. There's all Light Client has organized like a 444 call this week, and I think we definitely want to keep like a parallel tracks to like solve the the different concerns. But yeah, I agree. We can't address all those on today's call. I think we've managed to highlight most of them on today's calls. Today's call, sorry. Ansgar, you've had your hand up a while, and then Andrew, you want to go after?
Sure, yeah. I think I agree with Felix. The thing is, practically speaking, given that I think it's by now clear that we won't at least decide that we will do a pre-merge 4488 fork on this call. And so I would say with then the holidays in between and everything, I think the window for, even if say next Alpha devs in 4 weeks or so, we would want to revisit this, which I assume we would only do if there was some very significant change in circumstances or whatever. Even then, it might already be too late for pre-merge folks. So I assume, just practically speaking, this means we won't do that. I just would want to say maybe it's like a few closing remarks. One, I think it's important to say, given that client teams seem to be very concerned about the worst case that would become more practical with this EAP, that means that this should generally be a concern, because the worst case without the EAP is even worse. It's just that it's maybe a little bit farther out, because rollups need a bit more traction to actually fill blocks currently, because it's more expensive, but it's only more expensive by a factor of 5 if you account for overhead of rollups, maybe in factor 4 or 3. And this might make a difference of a couple of months, but not more. So if whatever kind of like several terabytes history growth per year is a problem, like this problem would still arrive without the EAP, maybe a few months later. So we still have to prepare for that. That would be my remark number one. And then remark number two, I think, is just that I would say going forward, we should continue the discussion around like the role of all core devs in relation to the rest of the community, and like what decisions should be part of the all core devs process versus potentially other venues. Because I do think that it's kind of telling, as Marius was saying, no one on this call is very strongly in favor of this EAP. I mean, I don't know, Pankrat, myself as well, like, of course, like the EAP, but I think the people who really strongly are in favor of this EAP are just a very broad set of people that you might find on Twitter who just aren't represented here at all, and so have no voice in this process. And so I'd say going forward, we should really think about kind of how our governance on Ethereum can ideally kind of include all stakeholders. But I think for today, the decision is clear. We won't go ahead with this fork. So, and that's fine with me. So, yeah.
Andrew's had his hand up for a while.
Right. So I think we should definitely agree on going with 4444 along with 4488, or like at least commit to 4444. And from Aragon's perspective, it would be preferable to do 4488 after the merge, because it most likely will delay the merge. And it's so to my mind, we should start like discussing the shape of Shanghai a little bit. So we can perhaps tentatively say that we are going to at least start investigating 4444 alongside 4488 in Shanghai. And there are also quite a few things that we wanted to do in Shanghai. So at least we can try think in terms of the priorities, in terms of what's more important, less important, what we realistically should do in Shanghai, investigate, prioritize, and so on. So we should start thinking about post-merge scheduling and what's important there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've tried not to bring it up to keep our focus on the merge. I think, as we start wrapping up the merge, it makes a lot of sense to start looking at what's next and what the trade-offs are. For anybody kind of interested in just like the general things that have been proposed in Shanghai, the Ethereum/PM repo in the issues section has like a pretty good list of, I think, most EIPs that are proposed for Shanghai. So if you just look into that, there's a bunch of proposals to include X in the Shanghai hard fork. There's actually not one for 4488. So if one of the authors wants to just create one after this call, not necessarily for Shanghai, but just so we can kind of track it there, that would be valuable. And then the other thing that's not included in that list is beacon chain withdrawals, which is mostly which mostly has to be implemented on the consensus layer, but there still needs to be some mechanism, obviously, on the execution layer to credit those withdrawals, and that's also feels like a pretty high priority thing. But yeah, I think as the merge kind of wraps up, we definitely need to have that conversation, and if people want to start kind of forming opinions and discussing that now, it's valuable. Peter, you have your hand up?
Yes. I just wanted to add one small note to Ansgar's request or note. It's essentially noting that perhaps some of the OCODAC calls is not everybody from the ecosystem who might be impacted in with one EIP or the other is present here. So we might, it's hard for us to say whether 4444 is important, sorry, 4488 is important or not important, or very hard to say how important it is. And we should reach out to, or maybe organize a different value. Whilst I agree with the general idea that it's nice to have feedback from the outside, I think it's very important if we reach out for external feedback. Then obviously if we say that, hey, do you or don't you want 4488? I mean, that's kind of like asking, do you want to raise the gas limit by 10x or not? So the no-brainer answer is that obviously everybody wants smaller fees. So if the gas price, the gas limit goes up by 10x, fees go down by 10x, yeah, everybody's happy. So except the clients who actually have to maintain it. So from that perspective, I think it's fine to take 4488 out and ask the community whether it should be included or not. But I think if we do that with certain EIPs, then the EIP needs to be fully self-contained, as in you cannot just take 4488 out and leave 4444 in or out of the equation, because the two things go together. So I'm completely fine with the community saying that, do you or do you not want 88 along with 44? So the two together, that's a valid thing that can be debated, but it's unfair to just ask outsiders whether 88 should be implemented when we clearly know that technically it's shooting yourself in the foot. And obviously we know what the answer will be from the outside. Yes, they want it. So
the question would probably have to be about whether 4444 should be come sooner, because eventually it will have to be implemented anyway.
Yeah, and I think we should find ways to ask the community to get a clear answer of like what sacrifices are people willing to take. So like, for example, if the question is, would you be willing to break the UIs of applications that demand things that demand access to receipts older than a year, if that means a 2x reduction in rollups, like that's like actually a question that includes both sides of the trade-off. Like it's not necessarily that question, but like actually saying, you know, like what do you find more important? What are you actually willing to sacrifice? Because yes, like if you just ask, you know, do you want things to be cheaper? They'll say yes. But like if we ask a question that includes a sacrifice, they might say yes, even when they know what the sacrifice is, or they might not.
Right.
I would like.
Oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
One second. I'm sorry. I cannot raise my hand. I think in this. So what I want to say is, since I'm not here often in this call, I want to say I would really prefer if in the foreseeable future the all core devs would stay to be like this forum where we as the client implementers can like speak our mind about, you know, the issues, and you know, like keep that role. And basically, I mean, if there's a way to figure out, you know, what the community, whoever that is, wants, then it's like really good to have that represented here, and we can for sure discuss it. But like, you know, this call is, I think, a forum for client implementers, and it has to stay this way.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Right. And we can't like, yeah, it's very easy to spend an hour and a half just having like random viewpoints on this and not, you know, not discussing like basically having client implementers kind of be shut out from it. I think in terms of trade-off, like another thing that I'll put out there that's worth bringing up is there's a world where like we do the merge and then we could decide to prioritize 4488 and 4444 as a top priority, and then the trade-off there is maybe beacon chain withdrawals, right? And that's another case where it's like, are you willing to wait an extra 6 to 9 months for beacon chain withdrawals if we can get 4488 out before, and if transaction fees post merge are going to validators? And I think that's another kind of world where like it seems like the most complicated thing for Shanghai is probably the beacon chain withdrawals. It's probably the only thing that reaches across execution and consensus layer. So maybe having like a execution layer only upgrade prior to having something with withdrawals means we can ship it quicker and focus on something like 4444 and 4488. Yeah, so that's another trade-off basically, and one where it's like valuable to get broader input than just client implementers. Sorry, Ansgar, I kind of cut you off there.
No, yeah, but I kind of well, I just wanted to say to Felix's point, because I think it's generally true and very important that like this venue specifically mostly for client teams and other technical people to discuss the technical aspects is important. I would just say then that it becomes problematic mostly when we then start to introduce somewhat political questions in here, because then it kind of it tries to basically take the legitimacy of the technical competence and basically just implicitly uses that to make political decisions. And for example, that's why I was just, so for example, I really like the Geth write-up on it kind of made clear like all the technical concepts, everything. But for example, there were also aspects in there that I would call political around decentralization of roll-ups and these kind of things. And I would say this is at least we have to be careful there, because if it basically uses the legitimacy of the kind of the Geth team as the kind of the technical steward of the ecosystem, which in a sense it kind of at least is an important role there, to then all political points, then I think again, then we're starting to get into these questions of, yeah, but then if we also have these political topics, we really need to have broad participation of other people. So I think we have to do it either way, either just like stay only at on the technical points, or have a broader venue, but then also include other people more.
Yeah. So I can answer to this that as the Geth team, it is basically in our interest to be as neutral as possible regarding all possible uses of Ethereum. And this is a view that we have always held. So we are never to discriminate against any particular use, of the system. However, we also feel that it's important, basically to like stand up for that and basically say that, yeah, I mean, there will also be applications which are disadvantaged, for example, by the 4488. And this is maybe why we are taking this kind of stand, like it's not, like we don't really know that part. Is more, like we just kind of feel like it might put other people at a disadvantage, and like we would like to speak up for those as well. And I think this
Voters need to know
view is okay to have as a client implementer.
Agreed, and I didn't mean it as a criticism at all. It was just basically something to be careful about. But yeah, I think you're right.
And just one more thing to add along those lines is that I think we also mentioned in this text that there is this change that it might prefer rollups over using layer one for normal transactions, which is again fine. So there's nothing wrong with it, and there's nothing wrong to, so to say, politically prefer rollups, because if we decide that in the long term Ethereum should go towards rollups because they scale, then that is a completely fine stance to make. I think from our perspective, it's just important that the EIP highlights the implications that it will have for layer one transactions. It's fine. We can say that, yes, we are going to make everybody else's life more expensive and we're going to take the heat for it. That's fine. We just need to be explicit about it.
Cool. So I guess to summarize, it seems like we're not gonna do this prior to the merge. We keep the merge as the next next thing, and our focus there. There's a lot of like technical concerns raised about you know, how to best deploy this. I know, like client, you've been kind of asking questions about that in the chat, and others as well. Like, what do we want to see specifically for 4488 to be kind of, you know, considered more, and then there's basically solving the concerns around 4444. So that seems like something we, you know, pretty concrete we can work on as the, you know, merge work gets finalized. And along with that, we probably need to start thinking about what Shanghai starts to look like and the trade-offs there between the different proposals. If, you know, we want to include 4444, yeah, if we want to include 4444 and 4488 shortly after the merge. Yeah, does this sound generally reasonable? Peter, you have a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to add that essentially 4444 is kind of also incompatible with the current invariance of Ethereum, because currently Ethereum promises to keep all that data. And that's a promise that we said that once the merge is done, this promise is going to be reevaluated, because if you want to go towards rollups, if you want to go towards stateless clients, witnesses, etc., this promise needs to go. So it also feels a lot more natural for 4444 to be implemented after the merge, because that it's not breaking any promise, it's just upholding the new invariance of the new version of Ethereum.
Yeah, and Micah had a comment about that in the chat. Do we have time to discuss basically the post-merge historical guarantees for data? Yeah, happy to take the last 10 minutes to discuss that if there's nothing else on 4488 that people want to bring up.
I do hope that the conversation focuses on what we can do now related to 4.4s. I know that talking about after the merge is important, but there's also like questions that are circulating right now about what we can do over the next 3 to 6 months to make it so that 4.4s is in a place that clients are happy to implement post-merge.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It is a big EIP, and it's not just like something we can decide once the merge is done, like, hey, we're going to do 4444, because we're going to realize there's just a ton of work. So any work we can do in advance, you know, like the biggest area seems to be like, how do we actually standardize historical retrieval of blocks? You know, you need to prototype that, test it, and all that is kind of beyond the scope of like the consensus changes in a way. And we probably want that to be, if not like fully working, at the very least prototyped by the time we decide to include 4444 into a specific upgrade. Yeah, so there's a lot of value in starting those efforts now.
Yesterday, during the breakout call of 4.4s, we already kind of concluded that there are these steps, and you could think of it as the ability to import data in a standard format into clients without removing the ability to serve it on the current network layer. Then next, the experimentation with the distribution of the data. And then once those first 2 points are really solid, then you can warrant the removal of the current ability to serve the data.
And it feels like most of the feedback from the breakout session yesterday is that people are not happy with the proposed solutions for distributing the data. And the main solution that we discussed was chunking blocks into, you know, certain ranges that have been pruned and providing them over some sort of BitTorrent. And that would be the solution until we have the portal network fully operational. But I just generally see those two solutions as complementary in the future rather than just relying on one thing. So it feels like that's the current biggest blocker, and I would like to hear any feedback on that, or ways of distributing the data that people are more comfortable with?
I would mildly prefer to keep that discussion in breakout rooms, mainly because we have 6 minutes left, and I would personally prefer to discuss Ethereum's chain history guarantees, which seems simpler.
So what do you think the chain history guarantees? Like, they
So
do
right
feel
now,
pretty related, yeah. So
yeah, I'll set it up real quick. So right now, our Ethereum chain history guarantees is basically that for a client to be, a correct client, and not all clients are, you should be saving all of chain history and making it available to your users and over gossip. This is not a sustainable strategy indefinitely. It is a sustainable strategy for some period of time, and different people believe this will last different amounts of time. And so the question is post-merge, can we change that guarantee and say that there is no longer a guarantee that Ethereum's chain history will be available forever? At some point, it may disappear. It may disappear from some clients, but not others. It may disappear from all clients. It may disappear from the face of the planet. We are not guaranteeing that. If you want to keep that data, you can guarantee it some other way, in some other mechanism. But the Ethereum clients, that's not their job. Their job is no longer to guarantee that chain history will be available forever. And so the reason, if we can make that assertion and say that, and we agree that is a thing that we want to say going forward, then it opened up a number of doors for us. But we really need to tell users this far, far, far in advance of actually doing it. So like long before we actually start dropping chain history, we need to make sure users are aware of it. So dApps need to stop using chain history as like their storage mechanism, and like layer twos, like use their chain history as storage. Like that is how they do storage in most layer twos. And so I think with the merge, for a number of reasons, it's a good time to change that stance. And again, we're not putting a timeline on this. We're just saying at some point in the future, chain history is no longer guaranteed by the Ethereum clients. If you want it guaranteed, go elsewhere. And so I guess the first question is, does anyone disagree with this? Is there anyone who thinks that we should continue to make strong guarantees about chain history?
So we feel that with the merge, we are already basically dropping this guarantee because the beacon chain also does not provide this guarantee. So it's like, I think basically merge is kind of already this step where we are, going away from this, like history is available. We still have it, formally available for the applications, but it's something that, we have been working towards removing it for a long time. And I am strongly with you on this timeline to say that we should announce it, but at some point we got to make the announcement. So, yeah.
Which part of history does the beacon chain not provide?
What I mean is that like the beacon chain, fundamentally, the way it's built is like, it doesn't need all chain history.
Okay.
It has a data security.
We don't. I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't need the historical data for the execution clients either.
Well, yeah, but that's something that, like at the moment you do kind of need it. So.
Yeah, for what it's worth, after the merge, you don't need ancient block headers to prove that the chain is the valid one in terms of the proof of work seal, because we are on the proof of stake and it uses other mechanisms.
Yeah, so at that point, it's like basically optional. Like it's just a matter of do you want to have it or not. And we're not going to drop it right with the merge, but yeah.
And one more thing I wanted to add is that essentially, as far as we know, other clients already started skimping on chain history. I may be wrong here, please correct me, but I think Aragon's doesn't serve receipts anymore, at least not by default. Nethermind implemented chain pruning, so you can just prune your own nodes. So essentially, we are seeing that clients are leaning towards already pruning stuff that they might need, or at least making certain pruning mechanisms available via flags, and users will most probably, if the flags are available, they will most probably use it because, I mean, who wouldn't want to drop 300 gigs of data from their hard drive? So it's essentially the desire is already there to get rid of all that data. And if we want to explore features that would grow this data significantly faster, like witnesses or rollups, then the desire will be even stronger. So, I mean, we're going to end up in that point sooner or later. So might as well bite the bullet and do it properly instead of in the ragtag way where everybody implements something else.
So it sounds like so far everybody is mostly in agreement with this. Is there anybody who disagrees and we should keep these guarantees? If not, then I propose we just start announcing to the community now that, hey, chain history is going to go away one day.
I would this a bit. However, I think it's super important for us to support, I mean, to have archives and to have a very strong case on how we will still have some archives of that data. So it's fine to say that Ethereum clients will not have access to it, but I think we can just say that, well, it's everybody's problem, sort it out. So that seems like a bit of a hand wavy way out. So it would be nice to also say
I
that.
think
I
think in my mind, step one is we tell users Ethereum clients will no longer guarantee chain history, and then step two, we probably go out and try to build something else like torrents or portal network or whatever, and then eventually then we actually make good on our step one guarantee. That's just pragmatically, that's how I see things falling out, but I still think there's value in removing the guarantee first, or announcing the removal of the guarantee even before we have a solution to archives, nodes, and all those things. But I do agree, like someone should build that, and that would be useful, and that'd be something that maybe even people in this room will build.
So personally, I think we should have a solution, even if it's a dumb, simple solution. Maybe if it's just an IPFS or whatever base solution, BitTorrent-based solution, I think it's important to have something, an idea at least from the get-go on how we could serve that data, just so that people won't be freaking out that we're just deleting the history.
I see. So you're saying that when we make this announcement, you'd be more comfortable with making it if we make it in the form of Ethereum clients will no longer guarantee chain history. However, before we remove that, we assure you that we will provide some alternative mechanism that you can use voluntarily, but it just won't be part of Ethereum clients necessarily, such as we'll give it a BitTorrent or something like that.
So my personal thing that I'm afraid of is that we announced that clients will not need to maintain or will not maintain history. And then all of a sudden, clients will super aggressively start pruning it, just referring to this notion that, well, the promise was broken, so they can just prune it, and then it will be up for the last client standing to keep that data before it gets lost. I think
you're worried the announcement. The announcement will cause an exodus, is what you're worried about.
No, well, I mean, the announcement will give legitimacy for client implementers to very aggressively delete stuff, and they might prematurely delete stuff.
We are past time already. Sorry, guys. I just see Felix has had his hand up for a while, so I don't know if there's something you want to share.
Yeah, I'm not. I already said what I want to say.
Okay. So definitely need to continue those conversations. We can have them on Discord. I think, yeah, if you are listening, clearly the guarantees around historical data will change post-merge. It's a question of when and how rather than if. So, I think there's a lot of room in how this can be implemented, but it's something people should start paying attention to. I think it makes a lot of sense to spend time on 4444 going forward and making sure we continue to kind of flesh that out and, you know, regularly kind of present updates about it here. And then worth noting, this is the last Awkward Devs for this year. The next one would have been on December 24th. We're going to cancel that. But next week, there is a consensus layer call scheduled next Thursday at 1400 UTC. We will discuss updates on the merge and Kinsugi there. So if folks here want to show up there as well, the first part of the call will be dedicated to Kinsugi. Yeah, thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate also just like the tone of the discussion, worth calling out. Like I know there were a lot of strong feelings about 4488, and I appreciate everybody being respectful. I think we had like a really productive conversation. And yeah, this was a really good way to end the year for Awkward Devs. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice
Thank you
day,
too.
all.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Everyone.
Nice.
As
Happy
always, come
holidays.
join us in the
Bye.
Discord lounge. Bye, everyone.